Okay, weird one for you. The bread sitting in your kitchen right now might be the reason humans built cities, invented writing, and started believing in gods. Not fire. Not the wheel. Bread. Stick with me on this one. You're standing in a field of wild grass around 14,000 years ago, somewhere in what's now northeastern Jordan. Hot, dry, brutal sun overhead, and the plants around you look like nothing you'd want anywhere near your mouth. Thin papery seeds on brittle stalks, hard as pebbles, bitter as hell. Bite into one raw and you'll crack a tooth for nothing. And yet the people next to you are harvesting it anyway. Cutting the seed heads off with flint blades. Dragging the load back to camp so someone can spend hours cracking, grinding, and burning these tiny grains into something you can actually chew. Not because it's quick, because it's one of the most miserable jobs of the week. That grind is where bread really starts. Now, the part most of us got taught backwards. Humans settled down, farmed, then figured out bread. That's the tidy version. Except 20 years of digging says it went the other way. In 2018, archaeobotanist Maya Aarons Otegui flipped that timeline. Her team was digging at a hunter-gatherer camp in Jordan called Shubaiko 1, and inside 2 old stone fireplaces they found 24 charred food scraps. Under a microscope, those scraps turned out to be flatbread, made from wild wheat, barley, oats, and ground tubers from a plant called clubrush. Age? Roughly 14,400 years. 4,000 years before anyone planted a deliberate crop anywhere on the planet. Sit with that. People with no farms, no fields, no permanent houses were pulling off a 5-step recipe: harvest the grain, strip the husks, grind it into flour on a stone, mix it with water, bake it in the ashes. This goes back even further. Near Israel's Sea of Galilee, researchers dug up a grinding stone caked in starch from wild grain dated around 23,000 years old. In a cave in southern Italy, grinding tools go back 32,600 years, with oats heated before grinding. Long before farming existed, people scattered across the ancient world were already turning wild grain into food. Now, why that mattered? Raw grain does almost nothing for your body. That seed's wrapped in a tough husk, and the starch inside is locked in a structure your gut can't touch. Eat it raw and you're chewing on a twig. Crack the husk, grind it into powder, hit it with heat, and everything changes. The starch opens into something your body can finally absorb. Grinding and cooking grain isn't just cooking. It's a workaround, forcing energy out of a seed never designed to give it up easily. It matters even more once you know how small your gut is compared to other apes. Humans traded a bigger digestive tract for a bigger brain, a rough deal if you're eating raw plants, since those take forever to digest. Cooking fixed that for meat. Grain's different because a seed's whole purpose is to survive a trip through an animal and sprout somewhere new. That husk is armor built to survive digestion. Grinding cracks it open. Heat finishes the job. Bread made eating grain possible anyway. Once bread exists, you've got something huge. Food that's light, packed with energy, and doesn't spoil for days. Compare that to meat, which rots fast, or fruit, which bruises, or roots, which are heavy to carry. For people constantly on the move chasing the next food source, bread was fuel you could stuff in a bag and forget about. So, a question archaeologists have argued about for a decade. If bread showed up before farming, did bread cause farming? Making it from wild grain is exhausting. Hours of harvesting by hand, stripping every husk, grinding until your arms give out for a small payoff. But whatever people got out of it was worth something, because bread started getting treated like a special occasion food. The kind of thing you'd bring out for a big gathering instead of a regular Tuesday dinner. That brings us to Göbekli Tepe, a massive ritual site in southeastern Turkey built by hunter-gatherers around 9,500 BC, long before anyone there was farming. Researchers found signs of huge amounts of grain processed on site, likely to feed the crowds showing up for these gatherings. A lot of archaeologists now think the demand for a steady supply of bread and beer at these events pushed people toward planting seeds on purpose. The whole agricultural revolution might have kicked off because people just wanted more bread. Then bread took a turn nobody could have predicted. In ancient Egypt, someone probably left dough sitting out too long, baked it anyway instead of dumping it, and watched it puff right up. That's leavened bread, and it likely happened by pure accident, wild yeast drifting through the air and landing on the dough. The chemistry in plain terms: flour has two proteins that link into a stretchy web called gluten once you add water and work the dough. Yeast eats the sugar in there and releases carbon dioxide, and that gluten web traps the gas like tiny balloons scattered through the mix. The dough puffs up. Bake it, and instead of a dense rock, you've got soft, airy bread. The Egyptians ran with this. By the New Kingdom, they had close to 40 different kinds of bread, flavored with dates, figs, and honey, baked in the hundreds of thousands using ceramic molds. Bread was so central to their economy that it worked as currency. The workers building the pyramids weren't paid in gold, they were paid in bread and beer. The pharaoh's legitimacy came down to whether people were fed. Funny enough, bread and beer were basically the same invention wearing different clothes. Both start with grain, both need grinding, both need fermentation. Egyptian bakeries would crumble bread into water to ferment beer, and the foam skimmed off that beer went right back into leavening the next batch of bread. Nobody's sure anymore which came first, because the two are too tangled together to separate. Jump to Rome, and bread turned into a political weapon. There's a phrase for it, bread and circuses, describing how Roman leaders kept people calm by keeping them fed and distracted at once. Free grain handouts to citizens started around 123 BC and grew from there, eventually feeding around 200,000 people every month. The bakers turning that grain into bread were locked into a guild so strict you couldn't quit the job. Your kids inherited it whether they wanted it or not. For proof of how obsessed Rome was with this stuff, look at Pompeii. When Vesuvius buried the city in 79 AD, it froze over 30 bakeries exactly as they were, brick ovens and all. Archaeologists found a round loaf, pre-cut into wedges, still sitting in an oven 19 centuries later. Pompeii had roughly one bakery for every 350 people. Modern New York has about one for every 1,200. Bread wasn't a side thing there. It was the main event. What really gets me, almost every culture on Earth figured this out on their own. Tortillas in Mesoamerica, injera in Ethiopia, naan across South Asia, pita in the Middle East, arepas in South America. None of these groups had ever met each other. They all ran into the same wall, a starchy plant the body can't digest raw, and landed on the same fix: grind it, add water, hit it with heat. It got invented over and over everywhere because the problem itself only leaves room for one real answer. Bread even wormed its way into language. Companion comes straight from Latin for with bread, someone you literally share a loaf with. Lord comes from an old word meaning loaf guardian. Lady comes from a word meaning loaf kneader. It shaped religion too. Unleavened bread marks a rushed escape from Egypt in Jewish tradition. Bread becomes the body of Christ in Christian communion. In Islamic tradition, dropping bread means picking it up and kissing it before eating. Bread has even brought down governments. In 18th century France, regular workers spent up to 88% of what they earned just on bread. When harvests failed and prices spiked in the late 1780s, that wasn't something people debated calmly. That was a revolution. The let them eat cake line pinned on Marie Antoinette almost certainly wasn't hers. But people believing it for centuries shows how deep bread was tangled into political power. Even writing owes something to bread. The first writing system ever, Sumerian cuneiform, wasn't built for poetry. It was built to track grain. People needed a way to record how much barley came in and went out, and that record-keeping slowly turned into written language over time. Writing was born inside a grain warehouse. So how did humans actually invent bread? They didn't, not once, not in one place. It got invented over and over by people who never crossed paths, using whatever grain grew nearby, because the chemistry only leaves one real route: harvest it, grind it, add water, apply heat. Wild wheat in Jordan 14,000 years ago, wild oats in Italy 32,000 years ago, corn in Mesoamerica, teff in Ethiopia. Totally different people, thousands of miles apart, landing on the same answer because the problem only has one solution. That's the part that gets stuck in my head. Bread is just ground seeds, water, and heat. 3 things. Out of that, humans built farming, cities, empires, religions, written language, whole economies, and eventually revolutions that took down kings. Someone kneeling on the ground with a flat rock, crushing wild seeds into powder, had no clue they were laying the groundwork for civilization. They were just trying to eat something that wouldn't crack a tooth. Tomorrow you're probably going to eat bread without thinking about any of this for even a second. And that might be the most human thing about it. It's so wired into everything we are that we forgot it was ever invented in the first place.